I never told my son-in-law that I spent 28 years as a federal bomb technician clearing improvised explosives from 3 different war zones. To him, I was just a soft-spoken 61-year-old man who spent his Saturdays fixing up an old fishing boat in the driveway. He threatened my daughter. He told her if she ever tried to divorce him, he'd make sure she never saw her son again and that her father, meaning me, would regret ever raising her to be so ungrateful. She filed the papers anyway. And when he showed up at our lake house with 2 of his associates on a Friday night, well, let's just say I'd already been waiting for him a lot longer than he realized. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. And if you believe a father never really stops standing guard, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. The call from my daughter Melissa came in at 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was elbow deep in the engine of my old Boston Whaler, and I almost didn't hear the phone buzzing in my jacket pocket. When I did answer, all I heard was her breathing fast, shallow, the kind of breathing that means a person is trying not to fall apart in front of someone. "Dad," she said, "can you come get Tyler? Just for tonight, please." I didn't ask why. 30 years of training teaches you that when someone you love says please like that, you don't waste time on questions. You just move. I wiped the grease off my hands with a shop rag, grabbed my keys, and backed my truck, a dented '04 Silverado that had long since given up looking respectable, out of the driveway. My son-in-law's name was Derek Voss. He ran a chain of high-end fitness studios across 3 counties, the kind of business that photographed well on social media and always seemed to have more cash flowing through it than the studios themselves could reasonably generate. He was 38, built like he lived in a gym because he did, and he had a way of talking to people that made you feel small even when he was smiling at you. I'd never liked him. Melissa had married him 11 years ago anyway, and I'd kept my opinions mostly to myself, the way a father learns to do if he wants to stay in his daughter's life. I drove the 20 minutes to their house with the windows down, letting the cool evening air clear my head. Derek and Melissa lived in a newer development on the north side of town, the kind of neighborhood with matching mailboxes and sprinkler systems that ran on timers. I pulled into the driveway behind Derek's black Range Rover and walked up to the front door. Melissa opened it before I could knock. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was holding 4-year-old Tyler on her hip, his backpack already packed and slung over her shoulder. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond just being tired. "He's not here right now," she said quickly, handing me the backpack. "He went to pick up dinner. I need a few hours, Dad. I need to think." I took Tyler from her, and he wrapped his little arms around my neck the way he always did, trusting and easy, the way kids are before the world teaches them not to be. I looked at my daughter's face for a long moment. "Melissa," I said quietly, "what did he do?" She shook her head, glancing back over her shoulder like she expected Derek's Range Rover to come around the corner any second. It's complicated. His business partner is threatening him about some money, and it's making him crazy, and I just can't be here with Tyler while he's like this. I'll explain everything, I promise. Just take him tonight." I didn't push. I loaded Tyler into his booster seat in the back of my truck, made sure the buckle clicked twice, and drove him back to the lake house where my wife Carol was already setting the table for dinner. She hadn't known she'd be cooking for a grandson. Carol didn't ask a single question either. She just saw the look on my face, saw Tyler's small overnight bag, and got a second plate down from the cabinet. My wife spent 11 years as a family court mediator before she retired, and she has a way of reading a room that most people spend a lifetime never learning. Tyler fell asleep on the couch around 8, worn out from confusion he was too young to name. Carol carried him up to the guest room while I sat on the back porch, looking out over the dark water of the lake, turning the day over in my mind. Something in Melissa's voice had bothered me all evening. It wasn't just stress, it was fear, and my daughter does not scare easily. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. It was Melissa's number, but when I answered, it wasn't her voice. "You've got my son," Derek said. His voice was tight, controlled in the way that men get right before they stop controlling themselves. "Melissa's not answering her phone, so I'm calling you. I want Tyler back tonight." "He's asleep, Derek," I said evenly. "It's late. Melissa asked me to keep him for the evening. We can sort this out tomorrow." "You don't understand what you're getting in the middle of, Frank," he said, and his voice dropped lower, uglier. "This is a family matter. If Melissa thinks she's going to take my son and run off to Daddy's lake house every time we have a disagreement, she's going to learn real fast how that plays out in family court. I know judges. I know lawyers. I will make sure you never see that boy again if you keep interfering. Do you understand me, old man? I didn't raise my voice. I never do. I hear you, Derek, I said. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. Then I ended the call and set the phone face down on the railing, listening to the crickets along the shoreline, letting the anger settle into something colder and more useful than rage. Carol came out and sat beside me. That was him, she said. It wasn't a question. That was him, I confirmed. He's threatening to take Tyler from her, Carol said quietly. I could hear him a little, even from inside. I nodded slowly. He also just threatened me, I said. Told me I don't understand what I'm getting in the middle of. Carol was quiet for a moment, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. Frank, she said, you should probably tell him what you actually did for 28 years. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but there wasn't much humor in it. Not yet, I said. Let's see how far he wants to take this first. The next morning, Melissa showed up at the lake house alone, without her car, having taken a rideshare the whole way. She looked like she hadn't slept, and when she sat down at our kitchen table, her hands were shaking around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. I filed for divorce this morning, she said. I couldn't do it anymore, Dad. It's not just the fighting. I found out 3 weeks ago that he's been running money through the studios that isn't his. His business partner, this man named Curtis Reyes, I don't even really know him. I've only met him twice. He's been putting cash through Derek's books. Derek told me it was a short-term loan arrangement, but I saw wire transfers, Dad. Big ones. Coming in and going right back out within days. I asked him about it, and he told me to mind my own business, that it wasn't something I needed to understand. I kept my face perfectly still, the way I've trained myself to for 3 decades, even as something cold settled into my stomach. What else did you see, sweetheart? Account numbers, she said. Some of them weren't even domestic banks. And 2 nights ago, I found a duffel bag of cash in the garage, just sitting there behind his golf clubs. Actual cash, Dad. Tens of thousands of dollars. I asked him about it, and he grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. She pulled up her sleeve, and I saw the faint purple marks along her forearm, and something inside my chest went very quiet and very still. The way it used to right before I approached the device I knew was live. He told me if I left, he'd take Tyler, she continued. He said he knows judges. He said he'd make sure I looked unstable, that no court would give me custody. He said my own father raised me to think I was better than everyone else, and that you'd regret it. Her voice cracked. Dad, I'm scared. I don't know what he's involved in, but it feels bigger than just marriage problems. It feels dangerous. I reached across the table and took my daughter's hand, the same hand I used to hold crossing parking lots when she was small enough to need it. You did the right thing, I told her. You are not going to lose Tyler, and you are not going back to that house until I understand exactly what your husband has gotten himself tangled up in. Melissa looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was a teenager and had just realized her father wasn't quite the ordinary man she'd assumed he was. Dad, she said slowly, what are you talking about? You're a retired. I don't even really know what you did. You always just said you worked in hazardous materials disposal for the government. I offered her a small, steady smile. That's part of what I did, I said. Not all of it. Finish your coffee, sweetheart. Then I need to make a phone call. I want to explain something about the years I don't talk about at dinner parties. For 28 years, I worked as a technician for a federal explosive ordnance disposal unit, attached at different points to interagency task forces that dealt with domestic terrorism, cartel logistics, and for 6 particularly grinding years near the end of my career, financial crimes tied to smuggling networks that used legitimate-looking businesses as laundering fronts. I'd walked into buildings other men wouldn't walk into. I'd learned how money moves when people want it to disappear. Because more often than you'd think, the people building the bombs and the people laundering the cash funding them were the same network wearing different faces. When I retired 8 years ago, I told my family I'd worked in federal hazmat services. It wasn't a lie exactly. It was a door I chose to leave closed because Melissa deserved a childhood that didn't include worrying whether her father was coming home. But some doors don't stay closed forever. I walked into the small office off our bedroom, the one Carol jokes is my retirement shed, and pulled out an old contact list I hadn't touched in years. Not everyone on it was still living, but one name was, and he answered on the second ring. Frank Bellamy, said the voice on the other end. I was starting to think you'd actually managed to disappear into that lake house of yours. Not entirely, Gary, I said. I need a favor. Off the books if you can manage it. Gary Whitlow had been my supervisor on the Financial Crimes Task Force for the last 4 years of my career. He'd since moved up to a senior analyst position with a joint federal task force that tracked money laundering tied to organized smuggling operations. If anyone still owed me a favor in this world, it was Gary. I'd once talked him through defusing a device rigged to a laundering operations safe house when the bomb squad he was supposed to have was 40 minutes out and the timer wasn't waiting. Name it, Gary said. I need everything you can pull on a man named Derek Voss, I said. Runs a fitness studio chain, 3 locations, calls it Ignite Performance, and a business partner of his, Curtis Reyes. My daughter is married to Voss. She just found large cash deposits and international wire transfers moving through the business that don't match a fitness studio's normal revenue. There was a pause on the line, and I could hear Gary typing. Give me a few hours, he said. But Frank, if this is what it sounds like, you need to be careful. These smuggling-adjacent laundering networks don't play nice when they think their pipeline is compromised. And if your daughter's name is on any paperwork, I know how it works, Gary, I said quietly. That's exactly why I'm calling you instead of the local police. I hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of my office, looking at a photograph on the shelf, Melissa at 7 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a county fair. Before any of this, before Derek Voss ever existed in her life. I thought about the bruises on her arm. I thought about a man who thought threatening a soft-spoken retiree who fixed boats on Saturdays was a safe thing to do. He had no idea what he'd just done. Derek called 4 more times that day. I let Carol's phone go straight to voicemail and let mine ring out twice before finally answering the 5th call, my voice calm, almost gentle. Derek, I said, how can I help you? You can help me by putting my son on a phone right now, he snapped. And you can tell your daughter that if she doesn't come home tonight and drop this ridiculous divorce filing, I am going to make her life very difficult. I have lawyers. I have judges who owe me favors. She will not win this. She's not planning to fight you in the way you think, I said, keeping my tone almost sympathetic. She's scared, Derek. She found some things in your garage that upset her. Cash. Wire transfers. Maybe you could help me understand what that's about, and I could help calm her down. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for me to know I'd landed somewhere sensitive. That's not her business, Derek said, his voice tightening. That's not your business either, old man. You stick to your boat and your lake house, and you stay out of things you don't understand. Curtis and I have arrangements that don't concern civilians. Of course, I said mildly. I just want my daughter and grandson safe. That's all I care about. Then send them home, he said. Tonight, or I promise you, you will regret getting involved in this family. He hung up before I could answer. I set the phone down and looked out at the lake, at the long dock stretching into still water, at the tree line on the far shore where the sun was starting to sink. Derek Voss had just used the word civilians to describe me. He had no idea how precisely and how foolishly he'd chosen that word. Gary called back that evening, right around the time Carol was pulling a roast chicken out of the oven and Tyler was on the living room floor building a tower out of couch cushions. Frank, Gary said, and his voice had lost its casual edge completely. I need you to sit down for this. I'm sitting, I lied, standing at the porch railing. Derek Voss's studios are running about 4 times the revenue a business their size should generate, Gary said. Cash heavy, minimal digital footprint on the money coming in. We cross-referenced Curtis Reyes. And Frank, that name is already flagged in 3 separate ongoing investigations, tied to a trafficking network, moving product up through the Gulf, and laundering proceeds through small cash-based businesses across 4 states. Gyms, car washes, tanning salons. Voss's studios fit the exact profile. I felt the old, familiar stillness settle over me, the calm that used to arrive right before I approached something that could kill me if I made one wrong move. Is my daughter's name on any of the paperwork? I asked. More typing. A long pause. Frank, Gary said quietly. She's listed as a minority equity partner on one of the holding LLCs tied to 2 of the locations. Filed 18 months ago. Does she know that? My stomach turned cold. No, I said. She has no idea. Then someone put her name there without her understanding what she was signing, Gary said. Which means if this network ever gets raided, Or if Reyes decides Voss is a liability, your daughter's name is sitting right there on federal paperwork connected to money laundering for a trafficking operation. That's not a custody problem anymore, Frank. That's a felony exposure problem. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to Tyler's laughter drifting out from the living room, entirely unaware that his father had built a cage around his mother without her ever knowing the door had closed. Gary, I said, I need you to do something for me, quietly. I need that paperwork pulled and verified through proper channels so it can be challenged and removed the second this goes anywhere official. And I need to know exactly how deep Reyes's network goes and how close it is to actually blowing up. I can start the paperwork process, Gary said. But Frank, you need real federal involvement here, not just me pulling favors on the side. This is bigger than a family dispute. I know, I said. Give me 48 hours before you loop in the full task force. I need to understand exactly what Derek's next move is going to be, and I'd rather he make his mistake in front of me than in front of a courtroom. Gary was quiet for a moment. You're setting a trap, he said. I'm making sure my daughter never has to be afraid of that man again, I said. There's a difference, but it ends up looking the same. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Melissa stayed at the lake house with Tyler, slowly starting to breathe easier, slowly starting to look like herself again instead of a woman flinching at every text notification. Carol kept them both busy with small tasks, baking, gardening, teaching Tyler how to skip stones off the dock, the ordinary rhythms of a family healing in real time. I spent those 2 days doing something else entirely. I drove into town under the excuse of picking up hardware store supplies and instead sat in my truck outside Ignite Performance's flagship location, watching the comings and goings. I saw Curtis Reyes for the first time, a lean, sharp-dressed man in his 40s who moved like someone constantly aware of who was watching him. I watched 2 deliveries arrive at the back entrance in unmarked vans, watched employees carry duffel bags inside that didn't look like gym equipment. I photographed license plates. I noted patterns. Old habits, it turns out, wake up fast when they're needed. On the second night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I knew before I opened it who it was from. I know you have Tyler and Melissa hiding out at that lake house. Send them home by Friday or you're going to regret involving yourself in things that aren't your business. This is your last warning, old man. I showed the message to Carol, who read it twice, her jaw tightening in a way I recognized from 35 years of marriage. He's escalating, she said. He's desperate, I corrected gently. There's a difference. A man escalating with confidence makes demands quietly. A man escalating with desperation makes threats loudly, because he's out of better options. I looked out the window toward the dark tree line surrounding our property. Derek isn't dangerous because he's powerful, Carol. He's dangerous because he's cornered, and cornered men do stupid, violent things. So what do we do? She asked. We let him come, I said. Friday, like he said. We let him walk right up to our door and show us exactly what kind of man he really is, on camera, with witnesses, so there's never a question about who started this. Carol studied my face for a long moment. You've already set the cameras up, haven't you? She said. It wasn't really a question. 35 years of marriage means she knows exactly what her husband does with a Wednesday afternoon and a bag of hardware store supplies. Every angle of the property, I confirmed. Driveway, dock, tree line. Nothing gets close to this house without me knowing about it first. Melissa found out the full truth of who I'd been on Thursday night, the evening before Derek's deadline. She'd noticed me checking a small monitor tucked into the hallway closet, the screen divided into 6 quiet grids showing every approach to our property in grainy night vision. Dad, she said slowly, standing in the closet doorway with Tyler asleep on her hip. What is that? I could have kept the door closed a little longer. But my daughter deserved to understand exactly what kind of protection she was standing inside of. I sat her down at the kitchen table, and for the first time in her adult life, I told her the truth about the 28 years I'd spent working alongside federal task forces, dismantling explosive devices tied to smuggling and trafficking networks, learning to read danger in rooms other people thought were perfectly calm. You were a bomb technician, she said, staring at me like she was seeing my whole life rearranged in front of her. Among other things, I said, I spent a long time learning how dangerous men think, Melissa. How they move money, how they threaten people, how they panic when the ground shifts under them. Derek is panicking right now. His partner's operation is under quiet federal scrutiny, and Derek knows he's the weak link that could bring the whole thing down. That's why he's terrified of you leaving. Not because he loves you the way he claims to. Because your name is on paperwork that could put him away for a very long time, and he's convinced himself that controlling you is the only way to control that risk. Melissa's hands were shaking, but her voice, when she spoke again, was steadier than I'd heard it in days. "Is he going to hurt us?" she asked. "He's going to try to scare us," I said. "But sweetheart, he has absolutely no idea what he's walking toward." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You are not going to lose, Tyler. You are not going back into that house. And by this time next week, Derek Voss is not going to be your problem anymore." Friday evening arrived with a stillness over the lake that felt almost deliberate. The water flat as glass, the air heavy with the promise of a storm that hadn't broken yet. Carol had Tyler settled upstairs with a movie, Melissa sitting close beside him, the two of them wrapped in a blanket like they were trying to hold on to something solid. I sat on the back porch in my usual chair, a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the monitor I'd propped against the porch railing where I could glance at it without turning my head. At 9:40, the sensors along the front gate lit up. Headlights swept up our gravel driveway, Derek's black Range Rover, followed by a second vehicle, an SUV I didn't recognize, moving too fast for a residential road. I didn't move from the chair. I took a slow sip of coffee and waited. The vehicle stopped hard in front of the house, gravel spraying against the tires. Derek got out first, his expensive jacket rumpled, his face flushed with something between rage and panic. Two other men climbed out of the second SUV, Curtis Reyes, and a heavy-set man I didn't recognize who moved with the careful, watchful posture of someone used to handling trouble for other people. Derek marched toward the porch steps, pointing a finger at me before he'd even reached the bottom stair. "Where is she?" he shouted. "Where's my son? I told you, old man, I gave you fair warning." I took another sip of coffee and let the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle him. "Evening, Derek," I said. "You're a little later than I expected." "I'm done being polite," Derek snapped, climbing the first step. "You send Melissa and Tyler out here right now, or Curtis and I are going to have a very different conversation with you." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing, the small clink of ceramic against wood cutting cleanly through the tense night air. "Before you say anything else, Derek," I said, my voice calm and even, "you should know that your business partner's laundering operation has been under federal review for the last 2 days, and the LLC paperwork with my daughter's forged signature has already been flagged for removal by an active joint task force. Whatever conversation you think you're here to have, it's already over. You just haven't been told yet." Derek froze on the second step, his face going pale in the dim porch light. Behind him, Curtis Reyes went completely still, his eyes narrowing sharply. "How do you?" Derek started. "I spent 28 years learning exactly how men like your business partner move money, and exactly how men like you panic when that money stops moving," I said. "I know about the cash deposits at 3 studio locations. I know about the wire transfers routed through accounts that don't belong to a fitness chain. And I know Curtis put my daughter's name on a holding company without ever telling her what she was signing, which makes her a victim, not a partner, in whatever you two have built." Curtis stepped forward now, his voice low and hard. "Who exactly are you supposed to be, old man?" I stood up slowly from my chair, letting the porch light catch my face fully for the first time. "For 28 years, I was a federal explosive ordnance technician attached to task forces that took apart networks exactly like yours," I said. "I've walked into rooms far more dangerous than this porch and walked back out again. You drove up here tonight thinking you were threatening a retired old man and his family. You had no idea you were driving straight into the middle of a federal investigation that's already been quietly building around you for 2 days. Derek's face had gone from pale to a kind of frantic gray. "You're lying," he said, though his voice had lost every ounce of its earlier confidence. "You're bluffing." "Check your phone, Derek," I said quietly. I imagine it's about to start ringing. Almost on cue, Curtis Reyes's phone buzzed violently in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out, staring at the screen, his hand visibly shaking as he read whatever notification had just landed. "The accounts," he said under his breath. "The accounts are frozen. All of them." I hadn't lied to Gary about needing 48 hours. I'd spent them making sure that the moment Derek Voss decided to drive up my driveway and threaten my family, the entire foundation he was standing on would already be collapsing beneath him. "You don't understand what you've done," Derek said, his voice cracking, panic flooding into every word. "If this gets out, if Curtis's people think I brought federal attention onto this operation, they are going to..." He stopped himself, but the fear on his face said everything he hadn't finished saying. "They're going to do to you exactly what you were planning to do to my daughter," I said evenly. "Threaten someone who can't fight back and hope it solves your problem. Except you're not dealing with someone who can't fight back, Derek. You never were." Curtis Reyes took a step back toward the SUV, his instincts as a career criminal kicking in fast, recognizing a collapsing situation when he saw one. "This is done," he said sharply to Derek. "We're done. You brought this heat onto us." He turned and started walking briskly back toward the vehicle. That was the exact moment the tree line around our property came alive. Headlights flooded the driveway from 3 directions at once, as unmarked federal vehicles rolled in from the access road. I'd quietly had Gary's team monitor for the last 6 hours. Agents in windbreakers moved swiftly and silently across the gravel, flanking the 2 SUVs before either man could reach a door handle. Gary himself stepped out from the lead vehicle, radio in hand, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Curtis Reyes, Derek Voss federal agents. Hands where we can see them, now." The heavy-set man who'd arrived with Curtis didn't even attempt resistance, raising his hands immediately, the practiced motion of someone who'd been through this before. Curtis went rigid, his jaw tight with fury, but he raised his hands too, recognizing there was nothing left to fight. Derek, though, simply crumpled onto the porch steps, his legs giving out beneath him entirely, sobbing in a way that had nothing dignified left in it at all. "Please," he choked out, looking up at me from the step below, all his earlier bluster completely gone. "Please, I didn't know it would get this big. I didn't mean for any of this. You threatened my daughter," I said quietly, looking down at him without a trace of anger left in my voice, only a kind of cold finality. "You put your hands on her. You told me I'd regret protecting my own family. Whatever happens to you now, Derek, you build every part of it yourself." Gary walked up the porch steps and extended his hand to me, the quiet respect of 2 men who'd spent careers cleaning up things other people were too afraid to touch. "Nice work, Frank," he said. "We've got enough here to shut down Reyes's entire distribution network across 4 states. Your daughter's name gets scrubbed from every piece of that paperwork by tomorrow morning." Within 20 minutes, both SUVs were gone, taillights disappearing down the dark driveway, federal agents in their wake. The porch fell quiet again, the lake still and dark beyond the tree line, the storm that had been threatening all evening finally beginning to break in soft, distant rumbles of thunder. The front door opened behind me, and Melissa stepped out, Tyler asleep against her shoulder, Carol close behind her. My daughter looked out at the empty driveway where her husband had been sitting on the ground sobbing just minutes before, and then she looked at me, and something in her face shifted, the last of the fear finally draining out of it completely. "It's over," I told her, wrapping one arm around her while she still held her sleeping son. "He is never going to control you again. I promise you that." It's been almost a year now since that night on the porch. Derek Voss took a plea deal rather than face trial, cooperating against Curtis Reyes's network in exchange for a reduced sentence, though reduced still meant 12 years in a federal facility 2 states away. Melissa's divorce was finalized quietly, her name fully cleared from every fraudulent piece of paperwork Curtis had buried her under. She has full custody of Tyler now, and the 2 of them moved into a small house just 15 minutes from our lake, close enough that Tyler spends most weekends learning how to bait a hook off our dock, the way his mother once did at his age. Carol and I still live out here on the water, the same quiet life we've always had. The cameras are still up in the tree line, mostly out of habit now rather than necessity. Some evenings I still sit out on this porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the water lap against the dock, watching my grandson chase fireflies across the lawn while his mother laughs at something Carol has said in the kitchen. I spent 28 years learning how dangerous men think, how they threaten, how they panic, how they mistake quiet for weakness. But if there's one thing that entire ordeal taught me, it's that a father's instinct to protect his family never actually retires, no matter how many years pass, no matter how far behind him he thinks that old life is. If you ever threaten the people I love, it will not matter how much money you have or how untouchable you believe yourself to be. You will find out, eventually, exactly what kind of man you woke up. The real lesson in all of this is simple. True strength has never needed to raise its voice. Derek believed he could control people through fear because fear was the only language he understood. He mistook my patience for weakness and my silence for surrender. But the people who actually protect the ones they love don't panic when they're threatened. They watch, they wait, They understand the situation fully before they ever move. And the most dangerous person in any room is almost never the one making the most noise. If this story meant something to you tonight, go ahead and subscribe and tell me down in the comments what you would have done in my position.